Back in 2013, the historian Max Boot set out to write the definitive book on former President Ronald Reagan. After more than 10 years of writing, doing research, conducting more than 100 interviews, and spending countless hours poring over presidential documents as they were declassified and released, Boot developed a 700-page masterpiece on the man who he says made him a Republican in the first place. The new book, Reagan, His Life and Legend, begins with Reagan's tumultuous childhood and then follows him to Hollywood, into his governorship in California, the White House, and beyond. But as we sit 37 days away from a monumental election, Boot's book also holds particular relevance to today. In the book's introduction, Boot poses the important question: did Reaganism contain the seeds of Trumpism? Throughout the book, Boot examines Reagan's personality, his politics, and his pragmatism. He looks at how the charismatic ex-TV personality developed trust and optimism among his followers while maintaining few close personal relationships. How his rhetoric did not always line up with his policy. How, for instance, he utilized dog whistle tactics to harness cultural populism while simultaneously supporting immigration. Certain aspects of Reagan's legacy do hold remarkable similarities to Trump. For instance, Boot writes of Reagan, quote, far from claiming it was morning in America, he was suggesting that it was 10 minutes to midnight because California and the country were being destroyed by liberal policies. He resisted the label, but he was widely and correctly perceived as the white backlash candidate. Another striking similarity between the two Republicans is their relationship with the truth. Boot writes, quote, Reagan had a disturbingly cavalier attitude toward factual accuracy that arguably helped to inure the Republican Party to fake news. It was the relentless accumulation of vivid facts, quotations, and colorful anecdotes that gave his speeches such specificity and power, yet he felt no duty to fact-check or correct himself when shown to be wrong. He was convinced his larger moral point was correct, and that was all that mattered, end quote. While Boot acknowledges some characteristics of Reagan may have parallels to Trump, he is careful not to overstate their similarities. Reagan, at times in direct conflict with his own rhetoric, was a pragmatist. He was willing to compromise with Democrats for the sake of progress. For instance, he was famously against big government, at least rhetorically. You may remember this famous line.
I've always felt the 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help.
That was delivered during a 1986 speech in which Reagan announced what were record amounts of federal aid at the time. He also opposed the Equal Rights Amendment, yet still, he appointed the first female Supreme Court Justice, Sandra Day O'Connor. He vocally opposed taxes, yet oversaw numerous tax hikes. He criticized welfare programs in public. Meanwhile, he expanded Social Security and other entitlement programs. While the Reagan era may have laid the groundwork for some of the modern Republican Party's Trumpism, it's not a perfect parallel. But looking to the future, Boot writes, the question for the Republican Party now is what comes next? Will the party continue moving ever further to the right toward a Viktor Orban-style authoritarian movement that would presumably have Reagan, an avid believer in democracy, doing more spinning in his grave? Or will it revert to being a more center-right party in the Reagan mold? In the 1980s, Reaganism represented a right turn for the GOP. Today, it would represent a left turn, a restoration of a more moderate, if still conservative, outlook. That may still happen, but only if Trump loses decisively in November, and even then, it won't be easy, end quote. All right, before the break, I told you about a new book by the senior fellow for the Council on Foreign Relations, the historian Max Boot. His new biography of President Ronald Reagan delivers a thorough, holistic, and masterfully reported look at the life and legacy of the late president. The book is called Reagan, His Life and Legend. It was released earlier this month. He joins me now. Max, America has a complicated relationship with Ronald Reagan. The memory of Reagan, the legacy of Reagan. There were things that happened in his time that people loved or hated, and over time they came to take a different view. Let's talk about the moment we're in today versus the moment Reagan was elected, a time in which Americans were tired, they were frustrated about a lot of things, and he offered, for better, for worse, whether he believed it or not, a vision of a brighter future. Right. And that feels like the moment we're in right now, that Americans are looking for something that feels brighter, not darker.
Yes, no, I think that was a lot of the genius of Ronald Reagan, that he was often a poor manager, and there were a lot of problems in the 1980s that festered under his watch. He didn't address the AIDS crisis. He had the Iran-Contra scandal. A lot of things went wrong, but there were also some things that went right. And I think one of the big things that went right was that he helped America to move past the turmoil and the traumas of the 1970s, Watergate, the Vietnam War, the Iran hostage crisis, stagflation, gasoline lines. It was a pretty dark and dismal time. And Reagan had this kind of sunny, optimistic faith in America as a shining city on a hill. And he used his unparalleled communication skills to imbue that faith in the entire country and to kind of restore the country's faith in itself. And you can certainly make the case that today we've been going through some pretty dark times, too, whether it was COVID or January 6th. A lot of bad stuff has happened in recent years. And I do think the nation is looking for a more positive and optimistic path today.
That's where the comparisons to Donald Trump, though, end, because he's not really doing that. He has leaned into a very dark and dangerous present and future for America. So he's not, maybe he hasn't read your book yet, but he's not leaning into that.
Yeah, no, Trump is a very different personality type from Reagan. I mean, you can see that there were some continuities and some parallels, but there were also huge disparities, including the fact that, Reagan was pro-free trade, pro-immigration, pro-America's alliances, pro-NATO, pro-standing up to Russia. But the big difference really was that he had this kind of sunny, optimistic take on the world. He never denigrated his opponents, never engaged in name-calling, and always had this vision that America would always realize its potential. So it's impossible to imagine him out there talking about America as a failing country, which is something that Donald Trump does multiple times a day. It's just a very dour, pessimistic, gloomy vision of the country. And remarkably enough, Vice President Harris has kind of seized the Reagan-esque optimism mantle from the Republican Party today.
Let's talk about the degree to which there are policies that Reagan implemented that I'm sure a lot of people watching this show right now are not very happy with. It was remarkable how you captured in your book that it would be a turn to the left for the Republican Party at this moment to have a person like Reagan. That's where the Republican Party has moved. At the time, the presidential candidate was the party. I guess it's to the same degree today. But Ronald Reagan had defined this idea of small government, as you write. Everything he did wasn't small government-esque, but he defined it. That would be a left turn from where the Republican Party is today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, in many ways, Reagan was much more moderate in governance than he was in his campaign rhetoric. And you can see a lot of parallels between the campaign rhetoric of Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump. They were both suggesting at various points that Democrats were leading America down the road towards communism. They were both appealing to white bigotry. They were both populists who were denigrating the federal government, as you saw in that clip from President Reagan. But I think the big difference is that when he got into office, Reagan was able to pivot away from this extreme ideology. He was able to pivot to the center and make deals with Tip O'Neill and do things like signing an immigration bill that legalized millions of undocumented immigrants. You can't imagine Donald Trump doing that, but Ronald Reagan did that. And as you pointed out, sure, he cut taxes, but he also raised taxes. So his record was actually much more middle of the road than a lot of people realize. And of course, his crowning achievement, working with Mikhail Gorbachev to peacefully end the Cold War. Reagan was a lifelong anti-communist, and here he was at the end of his career working with the #1 communist in the world to reduce nuclear arms and reduce tensions. You would have never expected that, but that was the ultimate tribute to his pragmatism.
Arguably, and I sit here every show with my copy of Project 2025 next to me, arguably there's a legacy here, and that is the Chevron deference and the small government, right? The 9 most terrifying words, yes. I'm from the federal government and I'm here to help, yes. has manifested into a Supreme Court ruling that basically says we want government and government agencies to have less influence over your life. That is still one of Reagan's philosophies that has permeated our culture and politics.
Absolutely. And I think there was another philosophy, which was basically tax cuts, and tax cuts that particularly favored the wealthy, and which led to greater income disparity beginning in the 1980s. I mean, if you look at charts of income inequality in America, they begin to diverge pretty rapidly during the Reagan presidency. And of course, that trend has continued in recent decades. And that's been, I think, very destabilizing. It's really led to populism on both the left and the right. It's led to a loss of faith in America and our political and economic systems. And that is something that Donald Trump takes advantage of and exacerbates all the time.
What a remarkable, important, well-reported book, Max. I've been looking forward to having this conversation. I'm glad you're here. Congratulations. And I recommend it. It's a great read. Max Boot is a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. He's a columnist for the Washington Post. He's the author of the brand new book, Reagan, His Life and Legend, which is in stores now.